I didn't move. Not at first. The zipper was already half open when I reached my truck that night, and something inside caught the moonlight wrong. Something that shouldn't have been there. My hands shook as I pulled the bag free. Clear plastic. White powder packed tight.
Cocaine.
Maybe 2 ounces. Enough to destroy a man's life. I looked back at the house. The porch light flickered. Somewhere behind those tall windows, Calvin was probably pouring himself a drink, thinking he'd already won. Thinking I was too stupid, too broken, too desperate to notice what he'd done. But I noticed. I always noticed. See, people think silence means you're not paying attention. They mistake patience for weakness. Calvin made that mistake 20 years ago when we were kids, and he was making it again now. Some people never learn. I zipped the bag shut and sat there in the cold truck bed, my breath fogging in the October air. My pulse hammered in my ears. Part of me wanted to storm inside, grab him by the collar, make him confess. But that's what he wanted. That's what he'd always wanted, to make me lose control, to prove I was the angry stepson who didn't belong. Not this time. Not this time, Calvin. Hi viewers, kindly tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. Warm welcome to the family, enjoy the story. Let me back up. You need to understand how I got here, back in Maple Creek after 20 years, sitting in a driveway that used to feel like home, but never really was. Back in a house that should have been mine but got stolen piece by piece, lie by lie, smile by smile. My name is Raymond Alden. I'm 40 years old. I spent half my life running from this place, and the other half trying to forget it existed. But 3 weeks ago, I got a letter from an attorney I'd never met, telling me my stepfather Gerald had died and left me half his estate. Half of millions. Houses.
Land.
A family company worth more than I'd earned in my entire life. There was a catch, of course. There's always a catch with people like Gerald. To claim my share, I had to live in the main house for 30 days. With Calvin, my stepbrother. The same man who'd spent our teenage years making sure everyone knew I didn't belong. The same man who whispered lies to his father until my own mother doubted me. The same man who smiled at her funeral and told someone I wasn't really family anyway. 30 days. That's all I had to survive. When I pulled up that gravel driveway 3 weeks ago, the house looked exactly the same. Massive.
Cold.
White columns like teeth. Calvin was waiting on the porch, leaning against the rail with his arms crossed, wearing that grin I used to see in my nightmares. Well, look who crawled back, he said. I forced myself to smile. Just here for what's mine. He laughed. Actually laughed. Sure you are, Ray. Sure you are. The first week I kept my head down. Ate breakfast in silence. Fixed things around the house just to keep busy. Calvin watched me like I was a bug he was deciding whether to step on. Too polite. Too patient. I knew that look. It was the same look he had right before he told his father I'd stolen money from his wallet when we were 17. I didn't steal anything. Never did. But Gerald believed him. He always believed him. Then one night, I couldn't sleep. I was downstairs in the study, sanding an old cabinet just to keep my hands moving, when I saw headlights sweep across the window. I looked out. Calvin's car was still in the driveway, but he wasn't inside it. He was next to my truck, crouched low, doing something near the passenger door. I stayed behind the curtain, barely breathing. He glanced back at the house once, then walked inside like nothing happened. I heard his footsteps on the stairs, heard his bedroom door close. I waited 10 minutes. Then I went outside. That's when I found it. The bag. The setup. The endgame. I stood there holding that poison in my hands, and I realized something. Calvin wasn't just trying to cheat me out of my inheritance. He was trying to erase me completely. One anonymous tip to the cops, one search of my truck, and I'd lose everything. My share. My freedom. Maybe even my life. He'd planned it perfectly. Or so he thought. I looked at that bag of white powder, and I heard my mother's voice. Clear as glass. Like she was standing right next to me in the cold. Don't fight them the way they fight you, Ray.
Wait. Watch.
Let the truth do the work. She used to say that when Calvin would pull his tricks, when Gerald would take his side, when the world felt rigged and cruel. She believed in something I'd forgotten, that some battles don't need fists. They need time. I tucked the bag into my jacket and walked back to my room. I didn't sleep. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at that little plastic bag on my nightstand, and I made a decision. I wasn't going to run. I wasn't going to fight. I wasn't going to give Calvin what he wanted. I was going to let him hang himself with his own rope. The next morning, I made breakfast.
Eggs.
Bacon.
Coffee.
I smiled when Calvin came downstairs, hair still wet from the shower, looking rested and smug. "Morning," I said. He raised an eyebrow. "You're in a good mood. Just a good night's sleep." I lied. He poured himself coffee and sat down. We ate in silence for a while. Then he leaned back in his chair and studied me like I was a puzzle he'd almost solved. "You know, Ray," he said slowly, "I never understood why Dad put you in the will. You were gone for 20 years. Didn't call. Didn't write. You weren't family." I kept chewing. Didn't look up. "But I guess he felt guilty," Calvin continued. "Thought he owed you something. Funny how guilt works, huh?" I set my fork down, looked him dead in the eye. "Guilt's a strange thing," I said. "Sometimes it catches up when you least expect it." His smile faltered. Just for a second. Then it came back sharper. "Well," he said, standing up, "enjoy your breakfast. I've got meetings today. Business stuff. You wouldn't understand." He left. I heard his car pull out of the driveway. And then I went to work. If Calvin wanted a game, I was finally ready to play. What would you do if someone you trusted tried to destroy your life with one cruel move? Would you fight back, or would you wait for the truth to surface? The house felt different when Calvin wasn't in it. Quieter, like it was holding its breath. I stood in the main hallway, looking at the old family photos on the wall. Gerald in his prime, shaking hands with business partners. Calvin at graduation, that same arrogant smile. And tucked in the corner, almost hidden behind a larger frame, my mother. Her wedding photo. She looked happy. I barely recognized that version of her. The floorboards creaked under my feet as I walked upstairs. I hadn't been to the second floor since I arrived. Didn't see the point. But now I needed to understand this place again. Needed to see what Calvin was hiding. His room was at the end of the hall. Locked, of course. My old room was 3 doors down. The door was open. I stepped inside. Everything was gone. The posters I'd hung. The books I'd left behind. Even the scratches on the wall, where I'd measured my height every birthday. Painted over. Erased. Like I'd never existed. I walked to the window and looked out at the driveway. From here, I could see my truck perfectly. Calvin would have had a clear view when he planted that bag. Probably watched me through this very window, waiting to see if I'd notice. I turned to leave, and that's when I saw it. A cardboard box shoved into the closet. I pulled it out, wiped off the dust. Inside were old papers, bills, and photographs, things Gerald must have forgotten about. And there at the bottom was a photo of my mother, ripped clean in half. Her face on one side, Gerald and Calvin on the other. My hands started shaking. Someone had torn this. Recently. The edges were still crisp, not yellowed like the other photos. Someone had ripped my mother out of the picture and left her here in a box like trash. I heard a door slam downstairs. Footsteps. Calvin was back. I shoved the photo into my pocket and closed the closet, walked out into the hallway just as Calvin appeared at the top of the stairs. He stopped when he saw me. "What are you doing up here?" he asked. His voice was calm, but his eyes weren't. "Just looking around," I said. "Thought I'd check out my old room. It's different." He smiled.
Yeah.
Dad remodeled. Wanted to make it a guest room. You know how it is. Out with the old. "Right," I said. "Out with the old." We stood there for a moment, staring at each other. Then Calvin stepped aside, gesturing toward the stairs. "After you," he said. I walked past him, felt his eyes on my back the whole way down. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about that torn photograph, about the way Calvin had looked at me in the hallway, about the bag of cocaine still hidden in my room. Around midnight, I heard voices. low and urgent. I crept to my door and opened it just enough to listen. Calvin was in the study on the phone. "No, it's fine," he was saying. "He doesn't suspect anything. Give it another week, maybe less. Once the cops find what I planted, he'll be gone. Then we can move forward with the sale." My blood went cold. Sale? What sale? "Yeah, the merger," Calvin continued. "The board's already agreed. Once Ray's out of the picture, we finalize everything. Split it 3 ways like we discussed. He won't contest it from a jail cell." He laughed. Actually laughed. I backed away from the door, my heart pounding. This wasn't just about the inheritance. Calvin was selling the family company, cutting deals behind closed doors. And he needed me gone to do it. I went back to bed, but I didn't close my eyes. I stared at the ceiling, my mind racing. Gerald's company was worth millions. If Calvin sold it, he'd walk away rich and free. And I'd be left with nothing. Or worse, locked up for a crime I didn't commit. But now I knew. And knowing changed everything. The next morning, Calvin was already at the breakfast table when I came down. He looked up from his newspaper and smiled. "Sleep well?" he asked. "Like a baby," I lied. He folded the paper and set it aside. "You know, Ray, I've been thinking, maybe we got off on the wrong foot. This whole 30-day thing, it doesn't have to be torture. We're family, right?" I poured myself coffee. "Are we?" His smile tightened. "Dad thought so. That's why you're here." "Right," I said. "Because of Dad." He leaned back in his chair, studying me. "You ever think about what you're going to do with your half? I mean, if you actually make it through the month?" "Haven't really thought about it," I said. "You should," he said. "Because running a company isn't like swinging a hammer, Ray. It takes skill. Vision. You'd be in over your head." I took a sip of coffee. "Maybe. Or maybe I'd surprise you." Something flickered in his eyes. Anger, maybe. Or fear. Then the smile came back. "Maybe you would," he said. "But I doubt it." He stood up, grabbed his keys, and headed for the door. "I've got meetings all day. Don't wait up." The door closed behind him. I sat there alone in the kitchen, staring at my reflection in the coffee cup. Calvin thought he'd already won. Thought I was just the same scared kid he used to push around. But he didn't know what 20 years of hard work and hard living had taught me. Patience. Observation. Survival. I finished my coffee and went upstairs. If Calvin was planning something, there'd be evidence. And if there was evidence, I was going to find it. I stood outside his office door. Locked just like I expected. But locks were nothing. I'd learned how to pick them years ago, working construction sites where we had to get into storage units and old buildings. I pulled a bent paperclip from my pocket and got to work. Have you ever discovered something that made you realize someone you knew was far more dangerous than you thought? The lock clicked open easier than I expected. I guess Calvin never thought anyone would try. Or maybe he just didn't think I was smart enough to get past it. I stepped inside and closed the door behind me. The office smelled like leather and expensive cologne. Everything was organized.
Neat. Perfect.
Just like Calvin always pretended to be. His desk was massive, dark wood, polished to a shine. Papers stacked in perfect piles. A laptop, closed. A leather briefcase in the corner. I started with the desk drawers. First drawer, pens, paperclips, business cards. Nothing interesting. Second drawer, files labeled with company names, tax documents, contracts. I flipped through them quickly. Everything looked legitimate. Too legitimate. Third drawer, locked. I smiled. People only lock drawers when they're hiding something. I used the paperclip again. This lock was trickier, older. Took me almost 2 minutes. But when it finally gave, I felt that same rush I used to get as a kid when I'd solve a problem my teacher said was too hard. Inside was a small notebook. Handwritten. I opened it and started reading. Account numbers. Transactions. Dates going back 3 years. Transfers from the company's main accounts into smaller, offshore accounts. Amounts that didn't make sense unless you knew what to look for. Calvin had been siphoning money.
Slowly.
Carefully. Thousands at a time, so no one would notice. But it added up. Over 3 years, he'd stolen almost $2 million. My hands started shaking. Not from fear. From anger. This wasn't just greed. This was betrayal. Gerald had trusted him with everything. The company, the estate, the family name, and Calvin had been bleeding it dry the whole time. I pulled out my phone and took pictures of every page. Then I put the notebook back exactly how I found it and locked the drawer again. But I wasn't done. I opened the laptop. No password, cocky bastard. I went straight to his emails. And that's when I found the thread that changed everything. Messages between Calvin and someone named Marcus Lorne, a board member at the company. The subject line read, "Merger finalization." I clicked it open. Marcus. Once the estate is settled, we move forward. The buyer's ready. 4.2 million for full acquisition. You get her cut, I get mine, everyone's happy. Calvin. What about Raymond? Marcus. What about him? He's got no experience. No claim. Once he's out, the board votes. Simple. Calvin. He's not going anywhere quietly. I'm handling it. Marcus. Handle it fast. We're on a timeline. Calvin. Don't worry. He'll be gone before the month's up. I've got insurance. I stared at the screen. Insurance. That's what he called it. The cocaine. The setup. The plan to destroy me wasn't just about the inheritance. It was about selling the company out from under me before I even knew what was happening. I took pictures of every email, every message, every piece of evidence I could find. Then I heard something that made my blood freeze. A car door. Outside. I looked out the window. Calvin's car was in the driveway. He was back. Early. I closed the laptop, shoved my phone in my pocket, and moved toward the door. But I heard footsteps on the stairs. Coming fast. He was already inside. I looked around the office. No other exits. No windows big enough to climb through. I was trapped. The footsteps got closer. I could hear him humming. Casual. Relaxed. He had no idea I was in here. I pressed myself against the wall behind the door and held my breath. The doorknob turned. The door swung open. Calvin stepped inside, still humming, and walked straight to his desk. He didn't look back. Didn't check the room. Just sat down and opened his laptop like it was any other day. I didn't move. Didn't breathe. I was 3 feet behind him, and if he turned around, it was over. He clicked through something on the screen. Typed a few words. Then his phone rang.
Yeah, he said.
No, I'm home. Just checking some files. What's up? He stood and walked toward the window, his back still to me. I saw my chance. I slipped out from behind the door, moved into the hallway, and pulled the door almost closed, leaving it just slightly open like it had been. Then I walked down the stairs as quietly as I could and went straight out the back door. My heart was hammering so hard I thought it might explode. I sat on the back porch steps, hands shaking, trying to catch my breath. That was close. Too close. But I had what I needed. Photos of the notebook. Screenshots of the emails. Proof that Calvin wasn't just trying to cheat me. He was trying to destroy everything Gerald had built. I looked back at the house. Calvin was still upstairs, probably still on the phone, completely unaware that I'd just walked out of his office with the evidence that would bury him. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through the photos.
Clear.
Detailed.
Damning.
Then I stopped on one particular email. The last one Calvin had sent to Marcus. He won't know what hit him. I smiled. A cold, bitter smile. Neither will you, Calvin, I whispered. Neither will you. If you found evidence that someone close to you was planning your destruction, would you confront them immediately, or would you wait and let them make the next mistake? The next few days were the hardest. Not because of what Calvin was doing, but because of what I had to pretend I didn't know. Every morning, I sat across from him at breakfast. Every night, I heard him on the phone making plans, talking to Marcus, moving pieces on a board I wasn't supposed to see. And I had to act normal, had to smile, had to pretend I was still the clueless stepbrother who didn't belong. But inside, I was watching, waiting, learning his patterns. Calvin left the house every afternoon around 2. Said he had meetings, business lunches, clients to impress. He'd be gone for hours, sometimes until dark. And every time he left, I went back into that office. I found more notebooks, more account numbers, wire transfers to shell companies in the Cayman Islands, fake invoices, doctored receipts. Calvin had been running this scam for years, and Gerald never knew. Or maybe he did, and he just didn't want to believe his golden boy could betray him like that. But the more I dug, the more I realized something else. Calvin wasn't working alone. There were other names in those notebooks. Board members, lawyers, people Gerald had trusted. They were all in on it, all waiting for me to disappear so they could carve up the company like vultures on a corpse. I copied everything, stored it on a USB drive I kept hidden in my truck. If Calvin found it in the house, it was over. But out there, in the cold metal of my glove box, it was safe. One night, I was in the kitchen making dinner when Calvin came home earlier than usual. He walked in, threw his keys on the counter, and stared at me. "You've been here a lot," he said. "It's where I live," I said. "For now." "No, I mean here. In the house. You don't go anywhere. Don't see anyone. Just stay here."
Why?
I shrugged. Where would I go? I don't know anyone in this town anymore. He studied me for a long moment. Then he smiled. "You always were a loner, weren't you? Even when we were kids. No friends. No life. Just you and your tools." "Tools don't lie," I said quietly. His smile faltered. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Nothing," I said. "Just that I trust things I can fix." He didn't respond, just grabbed a beer from the fridge and walked into the living room. But I could feel his eyes on me the rest of the night. Suspicious. Wary. He was starting to wonder if I knew something. And that made him dangerous. 2 nights later, I woke up to the sound of footsteps outside my door. Slow. Deliberate. Someone was in the hallway. I stayed perfectly still listening. The footsteps stopped right outside my room. I could see the shadow of shoes under the door. Someone was standing there, waiting. Then the doorknob turned.
Slowly. Carefully.
I reached under my pillow and grabbed the old hunting knife I'd started keeping there. My grandfather's knife. The only thing I had left from before Gerald and Calvin. The door opened an inch. Then another. I could see a sliver of hallway light. Then it stopped. Whoever it was stood there for what felt like forever. Then the door closed again. The footsteps walked away. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. Just lay there in the dark, knife in hand, waiting for the sun. The next morning, Calvin acted like nothing happened. Smiled over breakfast. Asked me if I'd slept well. I said yes. He said good. But I knew.
He'd been testing me.
Checking to see if I was awake. Seeing how alert I was. He was getting ready to make his move. That afternoon, I followed him. Not in my truck, too obvious. I borrowed a bike from the garage and stayed a few blocks back, just close enough to see where he went. He didn't go to any office. Didn't meet any clients. He drove to a bar on the edge of town. The kind of place where people go when they don't want to be seen. I parked the bike behind a dumpster and watched through the window. Calvin was sitting in a corner booth with 2 men I didn't recognize. One of them slid an envelope across the table. Calvin opened it, glanced inside, and nodded. Then one of the men said something that made Calvin laugh. He pulled out his phone, showed them something on the screen, and they all laughed together. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but I didn't need to. I knew exactly what this was. Calvin was putting the final pieces in place. The payoffs, the deals, the insurance. And that insurance was sitting in my backpack, waiting to destroy me. I rode back to the house before he did. Went straight to my room and pulled out the bag of cocaine. It was still there, hidden in my closet, exactly where I'd left it. I held it in my hands and thought about what my mother used to say. Let the truth do the work. Calvin thought he was so smart. Thought he'd covered every angle. But he'd made one mistake. He underestimated me. I looked out the window. Calvin's car was pulling into the driveway. He was home. I smiled and put the bag back in the closet. Not yet. But soon. When you know someone's planning to destroy you, do you strike first, or do you wait for the perfect moment to turn their own trap against them? I didn't sleep much that week. Every creak in the house sounded like footsteps. Every shadow looked like Calvin. I kept the knife under my pillow and the USB drive in my pocket. If something happened, I needed proof close. But Calvin was getting sloppy.
Confident.
He thought the game was already over. That's when people make mistakes. One morning, I came downstairs and found him in the study, door wide open, talking on the phone. He didn't even bother lowering his voice. Yeah, next week, he was saying. I'll make the call then. Anonymous tip. They'll find it, arrest him, and that's that. Estate transfers to me by default.
He paused.
Listened. Then laughed. No, he's clueless. Hasn't said a word. I almost feel bad. Almost. I stepped back before he could see me. Pressed myself against the wall, my pulse pounding in my ears. Next week. He was going to call the cops next week. I had 7 days. Maybe less. I went back to my room and sat on the edge of the bed, staring at that bag of cocaine on my nightstand. I'd taken it out of the closet that morning, just to remind myself what was at stake. Calvin wanted to destroy me with this. Wanted to watch me get dragged out in handcuffs, my life over before it even restarted. But I wasn't that scared kid anymore. I wasn't the stepson who took the blame and kept quiet. I was my mother's son. And she taught me something Calvin never learned. Patience isn't weakness. It's strategy. I picked up the bag and held it up to the light.
Such a small thing.
But it carried so much weight. Someone's freedom. Someone's future. Someone's life. I thought about confronting Calvin right then. Throwing it in his face. Demanding answers. But that's what he'd expect. That's what he wanted. He wanted me angry. Out of control. Easy to discredit.
No.
I had to be smarter. I heard my mother's voice again, clear as if she were sitting next to me. Don't fight them the way they fight you, Ray.
Wait. Watch.
Let the truth do the work. I closed my eyes and let those words settle into my bones. Then I made a decision. I wasn't going to run. I wasn't going to fight. I wasn't even going to confront him. I was going to let Calvin hang himself with his own rope. That night, I waited until Calvin went to bed. Heard his door close. Heard the lock click. Then I went downstairs to his office. I'd been in there so many times, by now I could navigate it in the dark. I knew where he kept everything. The notebooks. The files. The briefcase. The briefcase. It sat in the corner, brown leather, expensive. The kind of case a man brings to important meetings. The kind that holds contracts. Documents. Things that matter. I knelt down and opened it. Inside were folders, a tablet, some pens. Nothing unusual. But there was a small inner pocket, hidden along the seam. I unzipped it. Empty.
Perfect.
I pulled the bag of cocaine from my jacket and stared at it one last time. This was it. The moment everything changed. I could feel my heartbeat in my throat.
My hands were steady, though.
Steady and sure. I placed the bag carefully into that hidden pocket.
Zipped it shut.
Closed the briefcase. Put it back exactly where I found it. Then I stood up, took a breath, and walked out of the office. My legs felt weak. My chest felt tight. But my mind was clear. Calvin had planted evidence to destroy me. Now I'd return it to its rightful owner. I went back to my room and lay down on the bed, staring at the ceiling. For the first time in weeks, I felt something I hadn't felt in years.
Peace.
Not because the fight was over, but because I'd finally stopped running from it. The next morning, I made breakfast. Eggs, bacon, toast, just like always. Calvin came downstairs looking tired. He'd been up late on the phone again, probably finalizing his plans. Morning, I said, sliding a plate toward him. He grunted and sat down.
Took a sip of coffee. Didn't even look at me.
Big day today?
I asked casually.
He glanced up. Why do you ask? Just making conversation. He studied me for a moment, then shrugged. Got a meeting later. Potential investor.
Could be big.
Sounds important, I said. You taking the briefcase? Always do, he said. I smiled.
Good.
Wouldn't want to forget anything important. He didn't catch the edge in my voice. Just finished his breakfast, grabbed his keys, and headed for the door. Picked up the briefcase on his way out. See you tonight, he called over his shoulder.
The door closed.
I heard his car start. Watched through the window as he drove away, that leather briefcase sitting in the passenger seat. I sat down at the table and let out a long, slow breath. It was done. The trap was set. Now all I had to do was wait. Let's see how you like what you planted, Calvin, I whispered to the empty room. If someone tried to destroy your life, would you have the patience to wait for justice, or would rage make you act too soon? The hours crawled by like wounded animals. I tried to keep busy. Fixed a loose hinge on the pantry door.
Swept the porch.
Organized tools in the garage. Anything to keep my hands moving and my mind from spinning. But all I could think about was Calvin. Driving around town with that briefcase. Meeting with investors. Shaking hands. Smiling that perfect smile. And the whole time, evidence of his own crime sitting inches away from his fingertips. Around 3 in the afternoon, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something told me to pick up. Hello? Mr. Alden? This is Detective Sarah Chun with the Maple Creek Police Department. My heart stopped. This was it. This was the call. Calvin must have found the bag. Must have called them already. I was about to be framed, arrested, destroyed. We've been investigating some financial irregularities at Mark's Industrial, she continued. Your stepfather's company. We'd like to ask you a few questions. Would you be available to come down to the station tomorrow? I exhaled. Financial irregularities. Not drugs.
Not me.
Sure, I said, keeping my voice steady. What time? 10 a.m. work for you? I'll be there. She thanked me and hung up. I stood there holding the phone, trying to process what just happened. The police were already investigating the company, which meant someone had tipped them off. Someone who knew what Calvin was doing. Or maybe it was just time. Maybe Calvin's greed had finally gotten too obvious. Too sloppy. Either way, the walls were closing in. And Calvin didn't even know it yet. That night, he came home late. I heard his car around 9, the engine cutting off, the door slamming. He walked in looking exhausted. Tie loose. Hair messy. Eyes red. Long day. I asked from the living room.
He jumped.
Hadn't seen me sitting there in the dark. Jesus, Ray. You scared me.
Sorry.
Just reading. I held up a book I'd grabbed from the shelf. He loosened his tie and collapsed into the chair across from me.
Yeah.
Long day. Meetings ran late. Investor got cold feet. Had to do damage control. That's rough, I said. He rubbed his face. You have no idea. Running a company isn't easy. There's always something going wrong. Always someone trying to take what's yours. I almost laughed. The irony was so thick I could taste it. Sounds stressful, I said. It is. He looked at me then, really looked at me. You ever think about what you're going to do after this? After the 30 days? Not really, I lied. You should. Because this life, he gestured around the room, it's not for everyone. Some people are built for it. Some people aren't. And you think I'm not, I said. He shrugged. I'm just saying. There's no shame in walking away. Taking your half, cashing out, living simple. It's probably better that way. Easier. I set the book down. Maybe. Or maybe I'll surprise you. He stared at me for a long moment. Then he stood up. Good night, Ray. Good night, Calvin. He walked upstairs. I heard his door close. Heard the lock click. I sat there in the dark for another hour, thinking about what he'd said. He wanted me to walk away. Wanted me to take the money and disappear. Because if I stayed, if I actually tried to run the company, I'd see everything. The theft. The fraud. The betrayal. But I already knew. And I wasn't going anywhere. The next morning, I drove to the police station. It was a small building on the edge of town, brick and glass, American flag out front. I parked and sat in my truck for a minute, gathering my thoughts. Then I grabbed the USB drive from my glove box and walked inside. Detective Chin was waiting for me in a small office. She was younger than I expected, maybe mid-30s, with sharp eyes and a firm handshake. Thanks for coming in, Mr. Alden, she said, gesturing to a chair. Of course. What's this about? She pulled out a folder and opened it. We've been investigating Mark's Industrial for the past 6 months. Anonymous tip came in about financial discrepancies. We've found evidence of embezzlement, fraud, offshore accounts. It's a mess. I nodded. I didn't know anything about that. I've been gone for 20 years. We know. But you're listed as a beneficiary of the estate, which means you have a stake in the company. We need to know if you've seen or heard anything unusual since you've been back. I hesitated. This was the moment. I could hand over the USB drive right now. End it. But something told me to wait.
To see how this played out.
I've noticed some things, I said carefully. Calvin's been making a lot of phone calls. Meeting with people. He seems stressed. Do you know who he's been meeting with?
No.
But I could find out. She studied me for a moment. If you do find anything, you call me. Immediately. Understood. Understood. She handed me her card. I took it, thanked her, and left. As I walked back to my truck, I felt the weight of the USB drive in my pocket. I had everything she needed. Every transaction. Every name. Every piece of evidence that would put Calvin away for years. But I wasn't ready to hand it over yet. Not until the timing was perfect. I drove back to the house and found Calvin in the driveway, loading his briefcase into the trunk of his car. He looked up when I pulled in. "Where were you?" he asked. "Just running errands," I said. He frowned. "What kind of errands?" "Nothing important. Just needed some air." He didn't look convinced. But he didn't push it. Just closed the trunk and got in his car. "I'll be gone most of the day," he said through the window. "Don't wait up." He drove off. I watched until his car disappeared around the corner. Then I went inside, pulled out my phone, and called Detective Chen. "It's Raymond Alden," I said when she answered. "I think I found something you need to see." Have you ever held the power to ruin someone and had to decide when the right moment was to use it? Detective Chen told me to hold tight. Said she'd send someone to pick up the evidence. Said it might take a few days to build the case properly. But I didn't have a few days. Calvin was getting more paranoid by the hour. More suspicious. I could see it in the way he watched me at meals. The way he locked his office door, even when he was inside. The way he checked his briefcase every time he came home. He knew something was wrong. He just didn't know what. That night, I waited until he went to bed. Then I went back to his office one last time. I needed to make sure. Needed to confirm that the bag was still in his briefcase. That he hadn't found it. That the trap was still set. The door was locked. I picked it faster this time. Muscle memory. I slipped inside and closed the door behind me. The briefcase was on his desk. Right out in the open. Like he'd been going through it recently. My heart started pounding. I walked over, hands shaking, and opened it. The folders were still there. The tablet. The pens. I reached for the inner pocket. It was open, unzipped, and empty. The bag was gone. I stood there frozen, my mind racing. He'd found it. Calvin had found the cocaine. He knew. He knew I'd put it there.
He knew I was onto him.
Then I heard footsteps in the hallway.
Fast.
Deliberate. Coming toward the office. I looked around. No time to hide. No time to run. The door swung open. Calvin stood there, holding a phone to his ear.
He stopped when he saw me.
For a moment, neither of us moved. We just stared at each other. Then slowly, he lowered the phone. "I'll call you back," he said into it. Hung up. He stepped inside and closed the door behind him. "Looking for something, Ray?" I didn't answer. My mind was spinning, calculating, trying to figure out how to get out of this. "Because I found something interesting today," he continued. "Something in my briefcase. Something I definitely didn't put there." He reached into his pocket and pulled out the plastic bag. The cocaine. He held it up between us like evidence at trial. "You want to tell me what this is?" I swallowed hard. "Looks like the same thing you put in my truck." His expression didn't change. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Sure you do. 2 weeks ago. Middle of the night. You planted that in my backpack. Thought you'd frame me. Get me arrested. Take the whole estate for yourself." He smiled. Actually smiled. "Prove it." "I don't have to," I said. "The cops are already investigating you. Financial crimes. Embezzlement.
Fraud."
It's over, Calvin. The smile faded. His jaw tightened. You called the cops? Didn't have to. Someone beat me to it. Guess you weren't as careful as you thought. For a long moment, he just stood there, staring at me. Then something in his eyes changed. Something dark and dangerous. You know what your problem is, Ray? You never knew when to quit. Even as kids. You just kept pushing. Kept trying to prove you belonged. But you didn't. You never did. Maybe not, I said. But at least I didn't steal from my own father. His hand tightened around the bag. Gerald wasn't your father. He was more mine than yours. You bled him dry while he was alive. And now you're trying to sell everything he built. Calvin's face went red. You don't know anything. You left. You ran away like a coward. I stayed. I earned this. By lying? By stealing? By framing your own brother? You're not my brother, he hissed. I took a step forward. You're right. Brothers don't do what you did. He moved toward me, and for a second I thought he might actually swing.
But then he stopped, took a breath,
smiled again. This isn't over, he said quietly. You think you're smart, think you've got me figured out. But you have no idea what I'm capable of. I know exactly what you're capable of, I said. That's why I'm not afraid of you anymore. He stared at me for another moment. Then he walked past me, opened the door, and left. I heard his footsteps going upstairs. Heard his bedroom door slam. I stood there in the office, my heart still racing, my hands still shaking. He'd found the bag, but he didn't know what else I had.
Didn't know about the USB drive.
Didn't know the police were already building a case. I walked out of the office and went straight to my truck. Pulled out my phone and called Detective Chun. It's Raymond.
We need to move now. Tonight.
Calvin found the planted evidence. He's going to run. We'll send units now, she said. Stay where you are. I hung up and sat in my truck, watching the house. Lights were on upstairs. Calvin's silhouette moved past the window. Pacing. Thinking. Planning. Then the lights went out. The front door opened. Calvin walked out carrying a duffel bag and his briefcase. He was running. I started my truck and pulled out of the driveway, blocking his car.
He stopped when he saw me.
Our eyes met through the windshield. Then I saw the flashing lights in my rearview mirror. Red and blue. 3 patrol cars pulling up fast. Calvin saw them too. He dropped the bag and raised his hands. When the truth finally catches up, does it come with sirens? Or does it come in silence? The morning after Calvin's arrest, I woke up in the house alone for the first time. No footsteps upstairs. No doors slamming. No whispered phone calls. Just silence. I made coffee and sat on the back porch, watching the sun come up over the trees. The air was cold and clean. For the first time in weeks, I could breathe. My phone rang around 8. Detective Chun. Mr. Alden, I wanted to update you. We've charged your stepbrother with possession with intent to distribute, embezzlement, fraud, and conspiracy. The evidence you provided was crucial. We've also brought in Marcus Lorne and 2 other board members for questioning. What happens now? I asked. They'll set bail later today. But based on the charges and the evidence, I doubt he'll make it. And even if he does, he's facing serious prison time. I thanked her and hung up.
Prison time.
Calvin was going to prison. Part of me felt satisfaction. Justice. But another part, the part that still remembered us as kids, felt something closer to sadness. Not for what he was, but for what he could have been. Around noon, the estate attorney called. His name was Martin Weiss, and he'd been the one who'd sent me the original letter about Gerald's will. Mr. Alden, given the recent developments, I need to inform you of the legal status of the estate. Calvin's criminal charges mean he's forfeited his claim. The property, assets, and company shares now transfer entirely to you. I sat down. Everything. Everything. The house. The land. Mark's Industrial. All of it. You're the sole heir. I stared out the window at the driveway, at the mansion that had once felt like a prison. Now it was mine. All of it. What about the company? I asked. The board is under investigation. Some members will likely face charges. You'll need to appoint new leadership. But yes, you now control the company. After he hung up, I sat there for a long time, trying to process what had just happened. I'd come back to this town with nothing. Just a beat-up truck and 20 years of resentment. Now I owned everything. But it didn't feel like victory. It felt like responsibility. That afternoon, I drove into town. Walked past the old diner where my mother used to take me for pancakes on Sundays. Past the hardware store, where I'd bought my first toolbox. Past the park where Calvin had pushed me off the swings when we were 7. Everything looked the same, but everything felt different. I stopped at the cemetery on the edge of town. Found my mother's grave under an old oak tree. The headstone was simple. Just her name and dates. No fancy words. That's how she would have wanted it. I knelt down and brushed the leaves off the stone. "Hey, Mom," I said quietly. "I know it's been a while. I'm sorry about that." The wind rustled through the trees. A crow called somewhere in the distance. "Calvin's gone. He's not going to hurt anyone anymore.
The house is mine now.
The company too. Everything Gerald built. Everything you should have had." I closed my eyes. Felt the weight of it all pressing down on my chest. I don't know if I can do this. Run a company. Be responsible for all those people. But I'm going to try. Because you taught me that decent people don't run from hard things. They face them. I stayed there for another hour, just sitting in the grass, talking to her like she was still there. Telling her about the USB drive. About the briefcase. About the moment Calvin realized he'd lost. When I finally stood up to leave, I felt lighter. Like I'd put down something I'd been carrying for 20 years. As I walked back to my truck, my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "You think you won, but this isn't over. I'll get out. And when I do, you'll pay for what you did."
Calvin.
I stared at the message for a long moment. Then I deleted it and blocked the number. He was wrong. It was over. Not because I'd beaten him, but because I'd stopped playing his game. That night, I made dinner in the big empty kitchen. Just scrambled eggs and toast. Ate alone at the long dining table where Gerald used to sit at the head, Calvin to his right, me at the far end where I couldn't be seen. Now I sat wherever I wanted. After dinner, I walked through the house room by room. The study, the living room, the upstairs hallway. My old bedroom that had been erased and turned into something generic. I stopped in Calvin's room. It was exactly how he'd left it. Bed unmade. Clothes on the floor. Laptop still open on the desk. I closed the laptop. Straightened the bed. Picked up the clothes. Then I locked the door and left. Some rooms deserved to stay closed. When you finally win the battle you've been fighting your whole life, does it feel like victory? Or does it feel like the beginning of something else entirely? The next few weeks were a blur of lawyers, paperwork, and difficult decisions. I met with what was left of the company's board. Appointed a temporary CEO, a woman named Jennifer Park who'd worked at Mark's Industrial for 15 years and had a reputation for honesty. She looked at me across the conference table. "You really want me to run this? You know the company better than I do," I said. "And I trust you won't steal from it." She smiled. "Low bar, but I'll take it." We restructured everything. Brought in auditors. Closed the offshore accounts. Returned money that had been siphoned off. It took months. But slowly, the company started to stabilize. I didn't take an office. Didn't try to pretend I was some corporate executive. I just showed up once a week, asked questions, and listened. The rest of the time, I worked on the house. Tore out the old carpet. Repainted the walls. Turned Calvin's office into a library. Turned my old bedroom back into something that felt like mine. And every Sunday, I visited my mother's grave. Brought yellow tulips. Sat for a while. Told her how things were going. One afternoon, about 6 months after Calvin's arrest, I got a call from Detective Chun.
"Thought you'd want to know," she said.
Calvin took a plea deal. 15 years. No parole for at least 10. 15 years. I tried to feel something. Anger. Satisfaction. Relief. But all I felt was tired. "Thanks for letting me know," I said.
There's one more thing, she added.
He asked if he could send you a letter. I told him I'd ask. I thought about it for a long moment.
No.
Tell him no. Understood. After she hung up, I sat on the porch and watched the sun set over the trees. 15 years. Calvin would be 55 when he got out. His whole life wasted. All because he couldn't stand the idea of sharing. Part of me wondered if I should feel guilty. If I'd pushed too hard. Been too clever. But then I remembered the bag in my backpack. The plan to destroy me. The stolen money. The lies.
No.
Calvin had made his choices. I just made sure he faced them. A few months later, I made a decision. I sold the mansion. Sold the land. Kept the company. But stepped back from day-to-day operations. Jennifer was doing a good job. She didn't need me hovering. With the money from the sale, I bought a small piece of property on the edge of town. Built a workshop. Nothing fancy. Just 4 walls, good light, and space for tools. I started making furniture. Tables.
Chairs. Cabinets.
Things my mother would have loved. I hired a few local kids who needed work. Taught them how to measure twice and cut once. How to sand with the grain. How to take pride in building something real. Word spread.
People started coming by.
Asking for custom pieces. Commissioning work. Within a year, I had more orders than I could handle. I called the business Alden Woodworks. Put my mother's initials in the logo. One day, a young guy came in looking for a job. He was 19, skinny, nervous. Reminded me of myself at that age. I don't have much experience, he admitted. But I'm willing to learn. That's all I need, I said. I taught him how to use a planer. How to join 2 pieces of wood without nails. How to finish a surface until it felt like silk. He reminded me why I'd come back to Maple Creek in the first place. Not for revenge. Not even for justice. But to build something that mattered. One spring afternoon, I was working on a dining table when my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer. But something made me pick up. Raymond. A woman's voice. Familiar but older. Yeah, it's Margaret. Margaret Chen. From high school. I smiled. Margaret had been one of the few people who'd been kind to me back then. Margaret.
Wow.
It's been a long time. I heard you were back in town. Heard about everything that happened with Calvin. I just wanted to call and say, I'm glad you're okay. We talked for an hour. About old times. About her life. About mine. She invited me to coffee. I said yes. That coffee turned into dinner. Dinner turned into more dinners. And slowly, something that had been frozen inside me for 20 years started to thaw. I wasn't alone anymore. When justice is done, and the dust settles, what do you build in the space that pain used to occupy? 2 years after Calvin's arrest, I went back to my mother's grave. This time I wasn't alone. Margaret was with me. And we brought yellow tulips. I knelt down and placed them on the stone. Same as always. But this time I didn't feel that crushing weight in my chest.
Just peace.
I wish you could have met her, Mom, I said quietly. You would have liked Margaret. Margaret squeezed my hand. I wish I could have met her too. We sat there for a while in the quiet. Then Margaret said, Do you ever regret it? Staying? Fighting? I thought about it. About the 30 days in that cold house. About the bag of cocaine. About the moment I decided not to run. No, I said. I don't. Even though it cost you so much? It didn't cost me anything, I said. It gave me everything back. My name. My mother's memory. My peace. She nodded. Didn't push. That's what I loved about her. She understood silence. We drove back through town, past the old diner, past the workshop, past the lot where the mansion used to stand. Someone had bought it and built a small park. Kids were playing on the swings. I smiled. That felt right. Better than ghosts and bad memories. When we got back to my place, a small house I'd built myself on the edge of the property, there was a car in the driveway. Detective Chen's car. She got out when she saw us. Raymond. Sorry to drop by unannounced. It's fine. What's going on? She handed me an envelope. This came to the station. It's from Calvin. Forwarded from the prison. I thought you should have it. I stared at the envelope, my name written in his handwriting. For a moment, I considered throwing it away. But Margaret touched my arm. You don't have to read it, she said. But maybe you should. I opened it. Inside was a single page.
Short.
Simple. Raymond, I know you won't forgive me. I don't expect you to. I just wanted you to know that I understand now what I lost. Not the money, not the house, but the chance to be decent.
You were right.
Mom would have been ashamed of me. I hope you find the peace I couldn't. Calvin. I folded the letter and put it back in the envelope. Didn't feel anger. Didn't feel satisfaction. Just nothing. And that was okay. You good? Margaret asked. Yeah, I said. I'm good.
Detective Chen left.
Margaret and I went inside. Made dinner. Talked about plans for the workshop. About a trip we wanted to take. About simple, quiet things that mattered. Later that night, I stood on the porch and looked out at the trees. Somewhere in the distance, I could hear the sound of the workshop's generator humming. Could smell sawdust on the wind. Could feel the weight of honest work in my bones. Calvin had tried to erase me. Tried to make me disappear. But I was still here. Still standing. Still building. And that was the loudest revenge of all. Not destroying him. Not even winning. Just living free from the poison that had tried to destroy me. Because in the end, quiet justice doesn't make noise. It doesn't scream. It doesn't demand attention. It just whispers. And when someone thinks you didn't notice what they did, sometimes the best thing you can do is let them find exactly what they planted. I walked inside, closed the door, and left the past where it belonged. Behind me. If this story moved you, if you've ever faced betrayal and had to choose between revenge and peace, share your thoughts in the comments below. Your story might inspire someone else who's fighting their own battle. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss our next story. We've got more tales of resilience, justice, and the power of choosing integrity over anger. Thank you for being part of this family. Until next time, remember, the loudest victories are the ones lived in quiet dignity.